Today we have a very special and touching episode of the EOR podcast. Marie Alessi is a renowned grief educator, keynote speaker, and author dedicated to transforming the way we approach loss. Following the unexpected death of her husband in 2018, Marie channeled her experience into a powerful movement aimed at helping others find light in the darkest of times. Her book, Loving Life After Loss, became a bestseller, resonating with thousands seeking solace and strength. Through her coaching programs, retreats, and speaking engagements, Marie has supported over 5,000 individuals on their healing journeys. She is also the host of the podcast Unsilence Grief, where she creates a safe space to discuss adversity and the paths to recovery. Marie's approach blends personal insight with practical tools, fostering a community where grief is acknowledged and hope is restored. Marie Alessi, welcome to the EOR podcast. Marie, welcome to the show today. I want to start today's show by letting everybody who's out there listening that this conversation it's a sensitive topic. We're going to be talking about grief today. Obviously, we want to talk about your story and what you did after. And I'll leave it there because I want you to tell your story. But I just want everybody to know that we all experience grief in different ways and we handle it in different ways. And I was really excited to have Marie on the show today because you've gone through it, you've presented on it and how people can handle it. And I guess I could say I've been blessed in that I haven't had anyone taken suddenly from me in my life. I don't know what that is. I don't want to call it fortunate or lucky. I don't think that is. I believe, everything sort of happens for a reason, but it's a tough conversation to have. So my first question to you, Marie, and welcome to the show, is let's start there. Let's go back to 2018, if you don't mind. Let's talk about your husband. Let's talk about that day, and I'll let you take it from there, and then I'll just let this conversation breathe.
Sure. Well, thanks, Quinn, for having me. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation because I feel that we do not talk enough about it openly, and I would really love to change that and encourage people listening to this to have the conversation. And I will also share what I mean by the conversation. But first of all, I'm going to answer your question and tell you my story about my husband. So my husband and I met 10 months after me moving to Australia, which was like I moved here in 2004. I met Rob in 2005 and he proposed to me 5 months later. So if anybody would have told me that beforehand, I would have said, you're crazy. There's no way I'm going to marry a man that I only just met 5 months ago. And we did get married 10 months after moving. So 10 months after meeting. So it was a really surprising thing for a lot of us, including myself. But when Rob proposed to me, I just knew. When so many people say to you, when you know, I never knew what they meant by that until I met my husband. I'm like, oh, that's what they're talking about. That feeling of you just know it was the right person, And Rob and I were that couple for everyone. They always went, oh my God, look at Rob and Marie. And, we were so in love from the first moment we met till that day that I'm going to share about. So Rob and I had 2 beautiful boys, Flynn and Jet. They are now 15 and 17. And at the time of that particular day, they were 10 and 8. So Rob went on a business trip to Perth, which is all the way across Australia. So from us, it's a 5-hour flight. And because we live so close to the station, we would often walk Rob to the station. He would catch a train to the airport and do it that way because it was just so much easier than parking and hassle at the airport. Walked hand in hand. The boys were on the bike, on the scooter. We were walking him to the station. And I remember we were at the station. I had this this very gentle nudge of taking a photo of Rob and the boys.
Mm.
And I mean, I take a lot of photos, so I didn't think much of it, but I'll listen to it. And I said, come on, boys, like, I want to take a couple of pictures of you and Dad. So he went, we took pictures. He went on a train. I kissed him goodbye. And I had this next nudge of taking a picture of the train leaving. I don't know why. It was such a bizarre thing. I took a picture of the train leaving, and my older son was crying when Rob left, which was very unusual. So that was the third thing where I thought, that's different. Why? Um, my younger son was always very emotional when Dad left. My older son was quite pragmatic about it. Not that he wasn't sad, but he showed it differently. But they were both really, yeah, emotional when Rob left. And I thought that's interesting. The next night, Rob and I had a phone conversation. We talk about love and connection. He told me about a couple that he met over dinner and how he talked to them about the five love languages and all the things that we often talk about because, I was already a coach at that time and I talk about that a lot. And he became like a hobby coach, I should say. That's the thing. We talk about it a lot. I loved it. And
Yeah.
he told me about how much he shared about love and connection. He said, I really feel I've given them a lot to think about. They're such a young couple, and going forward, I think that will make a big difference to them. And then it was the usual, I love you, I love you. And Rob was supposed to call me the next day at 7:30 to wake me up because my phone wasn't updating properly. And he said, don't worry, I'll ring you. I'll be your alarm.
Yeah.
And I woke up at 7:31 on the dot, and I thought something's off. And it's 1 minute, but Rob was so reliable, and the phone didn't ring all morning. So I kept texting and calling and texting and calling. And eventually I rang the hotel and said, I don't want to come across as that wife stalking her husband, but I know my husband's staying with you. And he was supposed to call me this morning. Can you please send somebody up to the room and check? And as I'm saying these words, I had a split second of a vision of Rob collapsing in a shower. And I remember shaking my head physically thinking, don't go there, Marie. Just don't buy into that. You're driving yourself crazy. And, you come up with all these excuses, like he left the phone in the car. He might have, like whatever. And I actually said it to the hotel receptionist. I said, and can you check in a shower? I thought she must think I'm crazy saying these things, but that's exactly where they found him. Rob had collapsed in a shower. He had a brain aneurysm and died on the spot.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'm just taking a moment.
Mhm.
You you illustrated that story so well, because, and the reason why I was getting emotional, and we don't even know each other, but you, what really spoke to me was the simplicity of the story. The two of you, walking with the boys, like you created this picture that I could vividly see in my mind, and I think there is definitely an energy, a connection we have with the people that we love, especially the ones that we love very dearly and closely, that when something happens to them, there is a shift in the universe and in the energy in the world. And obviously you felt something was off.
Yeah.
And so, geez, wow. I'm so sorry for you, Marie.
It's okay. I actually,
It's
that
it's tough to
morning.
hear that, yeah, because I we take for granted every day. And my daughter makes a point of always saying, "I love you, Dad," before she leaves. And
Mm.
if I don't say it back to her, she'll yell at me. She'll yell at me. And
I
she'll
love you,
she'll
Dad.
yeah, and then she'll go out the
Forgive me.
door. And then if I haven't said it, she'll open the door again and go, "Hey, I love you." And I'm like, "Yep, love you, Annika." Um,
Yeah.
so I did read in doing the research for the show, I did read that what your response was, and how I'll let you tell the audience, like, what was your response, initial guttural response to hearing that, that they had found him.
Well, for me, the moment of hearing that, because it's very bizarre to call it lucky, but I feel that I was lucky that um, the sergeant from the coroner's office, took a heart and said, I have to ring this woman, because the protocol is that they send police to your house and police is supposed to inform you and all of that. we live in a small country town. We don't have a manned police station. So they, which I learned later, they were ringing around trying to find somebody to come to our house and tell us in person because, they're 5 hours flights away.
Yeah.
And he luckily picked up the phone and told me. And, the weirdest moment for me was when the phone rang and I saw an '08 number, which is, the area code for Perth. I instantly knew there was something. Um, you just feel it in your gut. There's something
Yeah.
not right.
Yeah.
And by that stage, I was already like, I had heightened anxiety already because I've been trying to call him all day. And I rang the hotel and they never rang me back. So the anxiety was just rising and rising. Then I talked to his boss. His boss said, no, he didn't show up at the appointment he was supposed to go to that morning. So then I knew something really bad happened because Rob would never not show up to an appointment.
Yeah.
And when he finally rang me, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Mind you, 7:30 in the morning, he was supposed to ring me. Around lunchtime, I rang the hotel, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was a whole lot of hours of anxiety rising and what ifs.
Yeah.
And when the phone rang, he said to me, I'm Sergeant such and such. He introduced himself from the coroner's office. I had this bilingual brain moment that I feel softened the blow for me, that sort of helped me not completely fall apart in that moment because me growing up in Austria, my mother tongue is German, I never heard the word coroners before. I didn't know
Mm.
what that, but I learned it quite fast, to be honest. So here is the thing. After I heard the news, I knew the first thing I had to do was I have to go downstairs and tell the boys about it. They had to be the first ones to know. And I had 7 seconds to prepare myself for that message that you can't sugarcoat. And this is where I want to step back 3 years. Rob and I had a what if conversation 3 years prior to his passing, which has become my lighthouse in my darkest hour. So 3 years prior, 2015, Rob called me on his way home from work and he said, babe, I'm going to be like 2 hours late. There was an accident on Heathcote Road. Heathcote Road, for those who don't know, here in Australia, goes all the way through the national park. There's no sideways. There's nothing. If there's an accident, you literally have to drive all the way around and back. It's like a 2-hour detour.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, 2 hours would be a huge inconvenience, and for one person, it meant that he never made it home that night. He was a young dad and he died in a front-on collision with a truck, young fireman. His daughter was 16 months old. And we heard about that and it hit home for us because we thought, 2 hours, what are 2 hours? 2 hours is an eternity for some people who don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
So that night we sat on our bed and we had the what if conversation. We're like, what would you do if something was to happen to me?
Yeah.
And vice versa. We talked about that in a lot of detail with a lot of tears and with a whole lot of love. And our answer was, if something was to ever happen to me, I would want you to create the happiest life possible for the boys and you. Because that's what love is. Love just wants you to be happy. And there was so much love that I remember saying to Rob, I love you so much. I can't even imagine you being alone for the rest of your life. If something was to happen to me, I want you to find love again. I want you to be with someone. I want the boys to have female influence in their life. I would really want that for you. And that I want you to create the happiest life possible was the first thing I had in my head when I hugged the boys and had to share the news with them. And from there on, that became my North Star, my everything. I just knew that whatever happens in life, I had no idea how to get there in that moment, but I knew where I was going. And that was, I want to create the happiest life possible for the boys and myself. So
Mm.
that was the starting point of a very, very different approach to grief, to what society expects from you or tells you. And I knew that I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. I knew that I wanted to bring lightness into their life as much as I could. And it was a long journey. And at the same time, for a lot of people from the outside, it felt it was a super quick journey. So time is so relative in that
Yeah.
moment, as you can
Yeah.
imagine. Um,
Mm.
but if you're okay with that, I'm just going to continue that story here because there
Please.
was a very, very significant significant moment that happened in my life about 3 weeks after Rob's passing. There were quite a few, but I'm gonna tell you a few of those today because I find, it gives a lot of people hope when they hear
Mhm.
that.
Please.
So, the first thing was we then packed up, drove to Rob's mum and dad, shared the news there in person because I thought there's no way I wanna tell them that over the phone. It was horrible enough for me to hear it.
Yeah.
The next day we flew to Perth to identify Rob's body. We spent a couple of days there. Luckily, our previous neighbors had moved to Perth and took us in, which was amazing. They drove us to the mortuary. They did everything with us. It was absolutely incredible. Um, and when we came home, we started arranging the funeral, the repatriation. Everything had to happen. And about 3 weeks into it, we held the funeral. And the funeral was midweek on a Wednesday, about 500 people in the room. The most beautiful gathering that you can imagine under these circumstances. There was so much love and laughter in the room. And I thought to myself, I remember a moment where I was walking literally from one person to the next. I wanted to talk to as many people as possible, and everybody was sharing stories and beautiful stories about Rob. And there were so many different emotions in that room, but the main emotion was love. And I had this moment where I thought, Rob would love this.
Mhm.
This is
Mm.
so in his honor, literally.
Yeah.
And so that was the Wednesday. And on the Sunday in the same week, I walked down our youngest to his first Holy Communion. And that was torture, I have to say. It was the hardest path for me to walk him down the aisle. And we were seated in the very back of the church, and I had to walk this entire aisle that felt like a kilometer to me to get him to this Holy Communion. And I remember I literally just made it. I had tears running down. I was really trying to keep it together for him and to make it a happy moment. And I walked around and I just nodded at his godfather, which is Rob's best mate. And he took Jed, and I walked out and I burst into tears. And that night, I had a full on falling apart moment. I had nothing left. I remember the boys bickering over something, brushing their teeth, and I called up a couple of times, and it just went in and out, as you can imagine. And it was a big day, and it was a huge week and a lot of emotions. And I remember I just ended up calling up and said, "Boys, I just need peace and quiet," like it just burst out of me. And the moment it burst out of me, it was like a valve had opened that I couldn't close anymore. I just kept yelling that sentence over and over until I was screaming it, and it turned into primal screaming, like pitch tone. I just could not stop screaming that same sentence. I just need peace and quiet. And then it just turned into screaming. And then I found myself on the floor of our kitchen, and I was whacking kitchen cupboards, screaming my lungs out. And then it was absolute silent in the house. There was no peace, but it was quiet. And something clicked. It was like an out of body experience. It was literally like I could watch myself falling apart and I couldn't stop it.
Mm.
And then something clicked where I thought, "Oh my God, the boys," like it literally snapped me back into my body. And I gathered what was left of me and walked upstairs. And my younger son was hiding under the blanket, and my older son was sitting on the bed. And I sat with them, and we had a very calm and very in depth conversation about support, about emotions, about needing help to express them in a healthy way. And I said to them, "How you see Doreen at school?" That was the school counselor. And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "I think I need to see somebody too." And my older son said to me, "I think that's a good idea, Mum." It was so beautiful. And I thought, my goodness, how have you grown up so quickly and have become so wise at the age of 10, and 8? And I felt like the worst parent ever in that moment. I thought, I completely let them down. And at the same time, in hindsight, very quickly, I realized that this moment of my rawness and me falling apart was probably the best thing that could have happened in terms of realizing how overwhelming and how strong emotions can be and how important it is to get support. Um, so yeah, that was the beginning of all of our journey. And I did go and find a positive psychologist that I work with for about 4 months. She was incredible. And Emily had such a gentle, beautiful nature, and I remember telling her about this falling apart moment and how hard it is, how and the entire population
Mm,
sort of expects from you, this is how you deal with grief. You fall apart, everything is heavy, and you cry and you scream, and you don't know how to get out. And I said, but this is not how I see grief. You know, this was a moment for me where I realized that I want to do it differently. And she said, what does grief mean to you, Marie? And I said, empowerment.
mm,
It was such a bizarre moment. This word just popped up when she asked me that. And there was this primal power that I felt when I fell apart. And I thought, if I can utilize that to rebuild me, to rebuild myself and to hold that space for the boys that they need in which they can heal, then this is what I'm going to do. And I looked at her and I said, you know what? I think I need to write a book about this. And she said, I think you should. And I did. 5 weeks after that conversation, I had written and published my very first book, Loving Love After Loss, which ranked in the top 100 bestseller list of Amazon Australia.
mm.
And that was the starting point for something way bigger than us to come. And it was mind blowing how that could happen in such a short amount of time. We're talking 5 months after Rob's passing, just to give you an
Wow.
idea of time frame when that book
Yeah.
was published.
I'm just taking a moment. I want to ask the right next question, but not miss anything either. If you don't mind me asking, Marie, the night that it happened, and you had to go see your children to tell
Mm.
them, and you can refuse to answer the question if you want, but what was that like? Like, how did they handle it? Because kids obviously are different. They handle, like, for, and especially if they're young enough, they probably don't even believe it's true, right?
Yeah.
Um, just share that with us if you don't mind.
Yeah. So taking you back to that moment when I got that phone call, I often describe that as, imagine your favorite song playing on a record player and then the needle screeches and the music stops. That's sort of how it felt. I felt like my whole world went into slow motion and everything around me kept spinning. And then I walked downstairs. We've got 7 steps from my bedroom to the living room. And they were sitting there with their martial arts uniform because I was about to take them to Hapkido training.
Mm,
And they were both on their iPads because, I was like, I just have to make one more phone call, one more phone call. I had such high anxiety levels at that moment already because I still didn't know what had happened, that I just, as you do as a parent in that moment, just go on your iPads, we're leaving soon, keeps them quiet. So they sat there, and I remember we had this corner couch, and they were sitting on one side of the corner each, and I sat in the middle of them on the floor, was sort of kneeling down. And I said to them, can you please put your iPads down? And they looked at me, and, just the way you say it as a parent, they just put it down instantly. There was no one more minute in that moment. They put it down, and they said, what happened, Mum? And I said, this is the hardest thing I'll ever have to tell you. And I took both their hands and I said that their dad had just died. There is nothing that can sugarcoat or prepare you for a message like that. And there was that whole no, 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 and there was crying and screaming, and I was prepared for crying. I wasn't prepared for their screaming.
mm,
And I just held them, and naturally I burst into tears myself. And the 3 of us just sat together and cried for quite some time. And I just thought that all needs to come out, I don't even think I was thinking anything consciously at that stage other than that sentence in my head that I heard in Rob's voice, I want you to create the happiest life possible for you and the boys.
mm,
That all I could hear. And eventually, when we calmed down, I said to them, let's go and drive to Nano. No, no, I don't want them to hear that over the phone.
Yeah.
And yeah, they picked
How
up some things and we drove to Rob's parents. Often, I don't know who's watched who's watched a Terminator movie where Sarah Connor sits there and they drive into the unknown future and the road is completely pitch black and they're driving. That sort of comes close to how I would describe how I felt when I was driving to Rob's parents to tell them the news. Of course, the roads were not pitch black. We were not in a movie. It was harsh reality for us.
Mm,
But I remember that feeling of driving into an unknown future. That was really the most present in my heart. And in my head, I was just going through the tick list, who do I need to tell? What do I need to do? And on my way to Rob's parents, I called his eldest brother first. And then I called my mom because my mom had already booked her flights to fly out to the First Holy Communion, which
mm,
was in the same week. And then I called Rob's sister and I said, please don't tell mum and dad. I want to tell them in person. And she said, of course not. And then within half an hour of us arriving there, all the siblings, friends, closest friends and family arrived and all gathered in the kitchen. And I remember sitting under the air condition with like 3 layers on because it was winter. It was around this time of the year. We're actually less than 2 weeks away from his 7th anniversary of passing.
mm,
And it was freezing. And I was sitting under the air condition, blowing hot air on me with 3 layers, and I just couldn't warm up. I was so cold, and
mm.
I was just staring at the boys. I was just scanning them the whole time, watching their every move, watching them drifting in and out of reality and surreal. They had their iPads, and I could see them drift into this safe virtual world and then coming back, and there was such emptiness in their eyes. It was absolutely heartbreaking to watch them.
Yeah.
Mm.
I have I have children of my own and they're older, but I that is one of the it has to be one of the hardest conversations you would have to have um
Yeah.
as the mother. I mean, it's one thing to talk to Rob's parents and and the siblings as adults, right? The conversation with the kids is it's another completely another world really when you're talking with them and how they respond to that. You talked about the drive and driving into the future and the thing that kind of crossed my mind is and I think you mentioned it was like probably there was probably 1,000 thoughts going through your head and being the one who probably feels responsible for, okay, now what happens.
Mm.
You're like, okay, who do I need to contact, and all these, it's almost like this checklist.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you probably and I have not been there, Marie, and I don't even want to guess, but you probably also have moments of just numbness where you're not thinking about anything at all. And then all of a sudden you kind of snap back and now it's like 17 different things to think about. I can't relate. I know at some point in time something like this, may happen. We're not the thing that keeps going through my mind, Marie, is and I go back to what my comment was earlier about we like taking life for granted and that we're not promised tomorrow,
Yeah.
no matter what age. Children are taken from us all the time. Our grandparents pass away. Um, I know, my uncle was actually killed in a car crash in 2003, and that was very unexpected. He was 56.
Mm.
And yeah, it's let's
Mm.
move to how people respond to grief because I know that your book
Can I just,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say one thing
yeah,
about this, as I said, before we move on to how
please.
we handle grief.
Yeah.
Um, the whole idea of we take life for granted was very much taken away from me when I was 20.
Mm.
And I'm not even sure if you know that part of my story or
I
not,
read
but
that. Yeah. Go ahead and
yeah.
share with us so.
Yeah, I just want to quickly share this because that has really changed my life in quite a traumatic way, actually. So my dad passed away when I was 20,
Right.
and he was only 46. So basically a year and a half older than Rob was when he died.
Yeah.
And having my dad, I want to call it taken away from me because that's how I felt it back then
Sure.
at such a young age, really gave me, I call them the hidden gifts in adversity.
Mm.
And I would
Mm.
call it gave me the gift of living my life from a very different perspective from that, not from that moment forward, but probably about a year and a half into it. I started to go to therapy to work through my dad's passing because I didn't handle it well at all. I probably spent about a year in complete numbness,
Mm.
looking back, and didn't know how to handle grief at all at that stage. At an age of 20, like nobody teaches you how to actually handle grief. It's not something that is talked about. So we'll get to that in a moment. But I just wanted to share that quickly because in hindsight, I often said, my dad's passing and how my life changed after that was actually, it felt like a wedding gift from my dad to us because our relationship was such a conscious, beautifully lived, very present relationship. Rob and I were so present to each other. We were so, and what people always say, oh, you two, you're so in love. It was a very conscious decision. That's what we wanted, and that's how we wanted to live our lives, to be very present for each other, to each other, and have date nights, even when the boys were little, like to make sure that we really honor our relationship. And Rob and I never had a day in our lives in the entire time that we were together where we didn't tell each other how much we loved each other, not out of fear or, oh, what if I can't tell you tomorrow, but out of, if I don't tell you, I'm going to burst, like
Mhm.
it was
Yeah.
this beautiful feeling of, yeah, being in love even after 12 years of marriage, that still holding hands, I loved that we were that couple.
Mhm.
And I know that I had a lot to thank that circumstance in my life for, that I learned at such a young age to never, ever take life for granted.
Mhm.
And I'm not a saint, absolutely not. I'm not superhuman, absolutely not. I still have moments where I take things for granted and then, something kicks in where I fall back into gratitude for everything that is. Yeah, I just wanted to share that because,
No, thank you for
yeah.
that. Thank you. That's a critical part of the story. And
Mm.
and I had read that, and I was hoping you would share that because, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like in some unique way, your father's passing and how the feelings you went through after that and the next few years, when Rob passed away, it almost prepared you in a certain way, or at least you responded differently, do you think?
I always think that, you know, you hear that sentence very often
Yeah.
particularly when it comes to adversity. I wasn't prepared for that,
Mm.
or nothing prepares you for that. People use that a lot.
Yeah.
And when I looked back on my timeline, I could see everything that had prepared me for that moment. Um, my childhood was anything else but perfect. And I'm not going to go there because that's for another
Yeah.
podcast. But then the passing from my dad and how I dealt with it, the therapy I went through, the me following my heart, moving to Australia, meeting Rob, getting out of advertising because I worked in a corporate world for over a decade when I fell pregnant. And I always said to him, I don't want to raise my kids while I'm still in advertising. I'll leave the industry as soon as we start a family, which I did. But then I stumbled into self development, became a coach, worked with mindset, relationship coaching. Like all of that has prepared me to deal with what we've been dealt in a different way, in a more positive way, and to use all my mindset tools that I've been teaching and practicing for so long for something rather unexpected. And all of that, my entire background, my coaching training, my personal experiences make me the perfect person to do what I do now. And everything I do now in my life is bringing lightness into grief. And we'll talk about that in more detail, but I just wanted to give that whole rainbow of experiences that brought me to where I am today.
I believe that all things happen for a reason.
Mhm.
Even unfortunately, even the most horrible things that happen because it obviously changes us. And you hope obviously for the better, but you hope that you learn from it, that you find power almost in it to help others, to take from it the silver lining. I know it was a struggle for my mother to accept her brother dying in 2003, and in the end, and I don't want to go into that story because I remain on yours, but so many positive things happened out of it, out of that passing.
Yeah.
And we don't ever wish death on anybody, obviously, and for nobody to be taken away from us. But
Mhm.
it's so interesting how life works and how now what you're doing, and this is what we're going to get into, what you're doing now almost felt like a higher calling. Like this
Yeah.
is what you were meant to do, but you had to suffer to get to this point, and it's so unfortunate to lose someone you love so much to get to
Yeah.
this, but you're
Yeah.
bringing light to so many people now and helping so many people because of that. So let's move to that. How let's talk about what you provide people who are going through grief. How do you help those people? Because I'm sure there's people that you've worked with that did not handle things well,
Mm.
at different situations and so forth. But let's walk through that and to the point where you are today now.
I will happily answer that question. I want to say two more things up front that will help
Of
bridge
course.
that gap that I feel there is. I want to share a little bit about a spiritual epiphany, I call it, that I
Please.
had. And it was only a few weeks into Rob's passing. I was upstairs in our bedroom where I received the news, as you remember, with the phone
Yeah.
conversation, with Sergeant. I'm so sorry. My cat's meowing. I have no idea
I can't
why,
hear
but
it. I can't hear it.
live.
We're okay.
In case you're hearing it, she's probably hearing us. She wants to be in the podcast.
Yep.
So you had this spiritual epiphany where I had this moment of recognition of, wow, this is this is our soul contract. This is what Rob and I have signed up for.
Mm,
This is what we decided to come here to do together. And that was big for me, as you can imagine, because it was only a few weeks after Rob died, and I was at that stage not even capable of wording that in those words like I do now. But there was this soul understanding that I felt in that moment, and I had no words for it. And then the more I processed that and the more I came to understand what that actually means, the bigger it became for me. And then I got to the point where I was also ready to share that with a couple of very close friends and then more and more. And then I started sharing it in speeches as well or podcasts now because I find that a very beautiful moment and I'm absolutely okay to share that now.
mhm,
That recognition, we had this soul contract. We came here to do that. And the other thing I want to say is I share that belief with you, Gwen, that you that everything happens for a reason, and it goes under this label, if you want to call it that. It's such a weird word for it, but under this understanding, I want to call it, of soul contracts, that
mm,
everything happens for a reason. And just like that sentence, everything happens for a reason, as well as gratitude, are two puzzle pieces in grief that are massively important to get to help with acceptance. But that's something that I strongly urge everyone to never, ever offer to anyone who's in deepest grief as
mhm,
advice, as help.
mm,
It
mhm.
is something that you need to come to. And I'm okay for you to say that to me because I feel like I'm in a space where I really absolutely do believe that and have healed to a point where it is absolutely um, it feels good to receive that. I can receive that. Yet people who are in the depth of their grief and haven't come to any point of acceptance or healing, and you say to them, everything happens for a reason,
Yeah,
it feels
that's
like a
not.
slap to them. Or just be grateful for what you have feels like a slap in the face.
Yeah.
You have to come through that acceptance and healing to be able to then go into gratitude and maybe even one day to understand that it did happen for a reason. But if you say that prematurely to someone, it is detrimental
Yeah.
and can really feel like a slap in the face. That's
There's a
all I can
time
say.
and a place,
Yeah.
and or maybe there never is that time and a place, and that person just has to figure it out for themselves, right?
Yeah.
It has to be that epiphany, almost like you said,
Yeah.
for them to see that. And
Yeah.
it could take years. It may never happen even, but
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that because as the words came out of my mouth, I even wanted to pull them back
No,
because you're
it's fine.
right. There's a timing for
Yeah,
that.
I said it because it makes us talk about it. So it's
Yeah.
absolutely fine. I just think, and it's okay to say it to me because I feel that I have healed through what I needed to heal through, and so it's absolutely okay for me to receive that. I'm just very aware of that. There might be people in the audience that are
Yes.
in the depths of grief and go like, how dare you say that to me?
Yeah. It's
Uh,
dismissive.
I've
Yeah.
I've said things to people like this is not having a go at you at all, and I know you didn't take it that way, but it is.
Hmm.
I've said things to people where I had to learn the hard way how hurtful that can be to people because I didn't realize in that moment because I hadn't been in their situation.
Yeah.
So coming back to your question, what do I actually do with that now? I I want to go back to the book that I wrote where I shared
Yeah.
with you. It you know it ranked in a top 100 bestseller list of Amazon Australia. I was absolutely blown away. I thought, wow, okay, that was such a moment of me realizing I think I've got something the world needs, and that is hope and happiness in a place where people need it the most, but expected the least, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So that book, when it came out and became a bestseller, and then that was mid-November and end of November, literally not even 2 weeks later, I jumped on the plane with the boys. I had booked a trip around the world with them because Rob and I had planned to travel for the entire year of 2019, and that obviously didn't happen. Um, so instead of going like, okay, I can't do this trip, I thought, what can I do on my own with the boys? There's no way I can travel for a year. There's no way I can homeschool two boys while we are grieving, while I'm on my own. I was not in a position to do that and also not in a position to sustain an online business that would have helped me do that from a financial point of view. So there were a lot of reasons why I couldn't do that, but I looked at what can I do? And I had this 2 months window before they would go back to school. I took them out of school early. I prolonged their summer holiday and because it was summer in Australia, for those who are wondering,
Yeah.
hold on, that's not summer. Yes, it is here.
Yeah.
So I wanted to take them away from all the first milestones to come without their dad, the Christmas, the New Year's, both their birthdays in January. There was so much to come where I'm like, I want to take them away from that. I need lightness. I need, something beautiful where we can be without being looked at with sympathy from the entire town
Mm,
and family
interesting.
and friends.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't bear the sympathy that people would portray. You would sometimes walk down the street, and I went shopping on my own. And this might sound quite weird why I mentioned this, but I went shopping on my own quite early after Rob passed because I thought the longer I leave it to face community, the harder it will get.
Yeah.
So I went out into community from the get go because I'm like, I cannot hide away now. This is the last thing I can do that I want to do. I cannot hide away. So I went shopping, and then sometimes you would have a good day. Ooh, dear me, I'm having a good day. Supposed to be grieving, I'm having a good day. Yes, it does happen. And I walk into the shops, and then somebody comes to you and is like, and they greet you with this face where the whole world is falling apart. And you're like, don't do this to me.
Yeah.
Don't do this to me. I'm finally having a good day. Please don't do this to me. And I would have to sometimes even say that to people. It's like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm good actually. And you almost feel like apologizing for feeling good. It's like, no, no, really, how I'm really good. Thank you for asking. It's that, whoa. So there is this setting boundaries from the get-go, and I knew I had to shift something. So I took the boys. We went traveling. It was absolutely the most amazing trip we ever had. Our first stop was the Maldives, and that was
Oh, nice.
like coming to paradise after everything we've been through.
Yeah.
And I use these words deliberately because there was really that rest that our souls and our bodies really needed after
Mm.
that turmoil of going through the death, the funeral, the aftermath. So landing on the Maldives was really a landing of our souls in peace and quiet, what I was craving so badly. And it was an absolute perfect start to our trip. And I then took them to the Canary Islands and we went through Europe. We ate escargot in Paris. And that's what my son wanted. And I can't believe he pulled the dad card on me and actually made me eat them too. I had no intention of ever trying escargot. It is the most disgusting thing. I'm sorry for all the French people listening to this. I can ever imagine. And there was no way on earth that I would have done that until my older son, who wanted to do that, looked at me. He's like, "Want to try some?" Mom was like, "God, no." Before I could think of anything more, yeah, appropriate or encouraging. And he looked at me, and his face dropped, and he said, "Dad would have tried it with me."
Oh.
And I'm like, "Okay, give me some."
Yeah.
And even my youngest son had some who would never, ever in his life had done that, but the dad card worked on both of us. So it
Yeah.
was such a bonding experience, disgusting and bonding. We still laugh about it today. Yeah, I took
Oh,
them to Germany and Austria, and we had Christmas in Austria, New Year's, Christmas in Vienna with my mom, New Year's in Salzburg with my two best friends at the time. And then I took them to Sentosa Island on the way back to Universal Studios for Flint's birthday. And we came back and life went back to a new normal for us. So boys went back to school and I went and started the biggest adventure after that happened, which was I created a global movement based on the first book. It had the same title, Loving Love After Loss. And I took um, in the next 5 years. So it was 2019 till 2023. I took approximately 5,000 people on their healing journey. So it was a very fast growing movement.
wow.
You can tell that just by the title. People are drawn to it. They need it. People
Yeah.
want to heal. People want to find the love for their life again. And I'm not just talking about a new love in their life as in an intimate partner. I'm talking about the love for their life, to really come back to loving your life after loss. And that is a big thing. A lot of people crave that and want it, but don't dare to even say it because of the expectation of society. Grief will always be there, grief will always walk with you. I don't believe in that. And I know that I stand not completely alone, but not with a lot of people on that opinion. Even people who work in the space of grief, as a grief counselor, as whatever, all the professions there are that deal with grief, a lot of those even hold the belief that grief will always be with you. It will become a part of you. Everybody's got a different a way of wording it, and um, it just changes shape. It just changes form. I have a very different perspective on that, and my perspective is that I treat grief like a visitor.
Mm.
So often when I share that, people then say to me, "Oh, it's like Inside Out, the movie." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, actually, I didn't even think of that. But now let's just go with that. It's a perfect explanation.
Yeah.
Grief is not always on the motherboard, steering the emotions. It is an emotion that exists, but she's not always there and not always in charge. So it is just a different perspective, I would say. Some people is like, yeah, but it's still in your brain, it's still with you in Inside Out with the movie. I
Mm.
say I look at it differently. I feel that joy is a permanent residence in my life. Absolutely. She lives with me. And yes, sometimes she goes to the markets. She's not always around.
Yeah.
Sometimes sadness comes in, sometimes grief comes in for a visit. And Grief and I have been that intimate. We shared a hot bath together, naked, sobbing. So yes, we were very intimate with each other and she doesn't live
Yeah.
here anymore. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's literally just how you look at things, and everything I do when I work with people is offering them different perspectives, reframes, different ways of looking at things, and different things to focus on. Because we all know what we focus on is what grows.
Yeah.
And I had my entire focus on how can I create the happiest life for the boys and I, and that's what kept me going. That's the direction I had with every book I published, with every course I offered, with every retreat I held, with every speech I shared from a stage. It was my absolute driving force to create a happy life and to bring more lightness into grief.
Mm. The question that came up when you told me that was, do you think that when we talk about, how long should you grieve, or grief is always going to be in your life when something like this happens? Do you
Mm.
think there are people, and I'm sure you've worked with some 5,000, I'm sure you've worked with someone who felt like they didn't feel like they were allowed to show joy because they felt guilty showing joy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you experience that with people you work with?
A lot.
Yeah.
It's very common, and I experience it myself as well. And
Yeah.
I'm going to share one moment with you where I felt that quite intensely and instantly decided on the spot to flip it around for me. And it wasn't easy, really not. But it was a moment where I was standing in the kitchen, I was cutting some vegetables, and I, out of the blue, started singing Love is in the Air because that's a song that I would always sing for Rob,
Oh,
and I'm catching myself singing and my voice left me. And I had this moment of guilt and how can I possibly sing? And how can I possibly sing such a joyful and beautiful song?
yeah.
And instantly something clicked. That was like, how can you not, create the happiest life possible? And here is the difference I find in how I look at grief and how I handle grief and how most people look at grief and how they handle grief. On this side, let's call that society, there'll always be a hole in your heart.
Mhm.
Okay? And that you hear that a lot when somebody died
Yeah.
who had a huge role in your life.
Yeah.
And here's me. And my version of that is there'll always be a space in my heart.
Yeah.
Can you feel the difference?
Yeah.
It is such a vast difference in how you look at life and how you live your life. And when I think of Rob, I don't want to visualize him slipping through that hole in my heart. I want to visualize him being very comfortable in this vastness that I have created in my heart. And it's very comfortable in there, and there's a lot of space, and he'll always have a space in that, no matter if there is another partner in my life or not, no matter if the boys are little or grown up, if they still really need me or don't need me anymore, it doesn't matter. Rob will always have a space in my heart, and he'll always be a huge part of my life. And I have so much to be grateful for him. And therefore, yeah, that is my different perspective, and I wish for so many people to have that same perspective, to stop saying there'll always be a hole in my heart and go to the space where you feel that there'll always be a space in my heart, and
Mm,
that is something that I wish for everyone.
mm. That's beautiful. I love that there's such a subtle but distinct difference between the word using the words "hole in your heart" and "a space in my heart."
Mm.
Um, Here's the question I have, and it goes back to what you said about the conversation you and Rob had 3 years prior.
Mm.
Do you think it's important for couples, partners, spouses to have that conversation?
Yes, 100%. And I'll tell you two reasons why.
Mm,
First of all, I understand that this conversation can be, or very often is, very confronting, and it hits home, and it can come with a lot of tears, and there is that what if, and people, that's the fear, let's face it. The fear part is, "Ooh, what if that really happens to me?" um, but the other thing is that it can also be really bonding. It can deepen your relationship, it can deepen your love, it can deepen your understanding for each other. And trust me, if you ever have to live through that, and I don't wish it upon anyone, and
yeah,
at the same time, the one thing is we are all guaranteed that we will die at some stage. At what stage that happens, neither of us or nobody in this entire world knows. Um, but it has been so helpful for me to know that we had this conversation, even to the point where Rob said, I would like to be cremated and my ashes to go back into the ocean. Like, I would have had no idea what to do without that conversation. I would have really not known. what to do. And I'm glad that Rob told me this. Like
Yeah.
I um even mention it to the boys now, like in a very, very casual sort of, I'm like, yeah, I would love to have, I'd love the same to happen with me. It doesn't have to be when I die and sitting them down and making them all scared. It can happen in a very sort of passing by
Hmm.
conversation. Of course, you can say for us, it's so much easier to have these conversations because it has happened in our lives. We have dealt with it. And even more so important, I want to share these things with my boys. So I just want to say this. When you have conversations like that with your kids, yes, it can be scary. And I completely understand from a parent's perspective that you don't want to go and scare your kids and talk to them about, oh, if mommy and daddy die, like you don't do that. It's not
Yeah.
how you have these conversations. But if they come home and have questions, answer them in a not overreacting, completely normal, down to earth way. Yeah, let's talk about that. What if, make it a what if. Take the fear out of it because when you go like, oh my God, then of course they feel it's something big as well. So keep it as calm as possible and say, wow, what made you think of that? Or let's talk about that. Open those doors to your children, have these conversations when they ask you. And when it comes to your significant others, or your kids are already older, have those conversations. It doesn't have to be something scary or where you're like you have a terminal diagnosis. Don't wait for that moment because then
Yeah.
everything will be clouded already. The focus will be somewhere else. Have it on what would you like to have to happen in your life, or put it in your will. Make sure you've got your will in order. We didn't, and people have been saying it to us left, right, center, and we didn't. We didn't have our will in order because it was one point that we just couldn't make up our mind about, and so we kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, and Rob passed away without a will in place. So it overcomplicates things. Please
Hmm.
trust me on that. We always think we have more time. I am forever grateful that I trusted Rob when we were going through financial crisis for a little while, two kids, one income, mortgage. We were like, oh my God. And I said to Rob, do we really need that life insurance? He said, yes. And I said, oh. I was literally, although my dad passed when I was 20, I was literally, who needs a life insurance? We can, let's save some money here. And he's like, that's one thing I'm not ever going to save money on. I want the life insurance to be in place. He put his foot down and I'm so grateful he did because
Hmm.
it saved us, literally.
Yeah. There's so many important conversations that I'll stick with couples, right? Spouses, partners that they need to have like early on in the relationship. It's like, do you want children? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on child rearing? All those things. And then you go through, right? And then, but it's funny because people avoid the conversation about what would happen if I were to pass away because they feel like they're speeding up some clock that's bringing it quicker. And if that's the case, well, then we should talk more about being millionaires because we speed up the clock on that. But it is an important conversation. But you're right. It doesn't have to be this serious, morose,
Mhm.
dark conversation. It can be just over coffee and you just bring it up because I
Yeah.
think it is important to know what the other person's wishes are.
Yeah.
Do they want to be cremated? Do they want to be, buried traditionally? Do they want a religious ceremony or not? Like things like that. It is extremely important to have that conversation between partners and such. Your podcast, Unsilence Grief.
Mhm.
Um, how does what do you try to bring through the podcast to broaden the conversation about loss?
Yeah. I I love this question because for me, the podcast is such a passion project.
Mm.
I really just do it because I want to provide a platform where people talk about grief. And when I first started a podcast, it was in 2019, I believe.
Yeah.
I'm into season 6 now, and I had 1 year of a break. So it was originally called Up Spiral Grief. So I wanted to talk about how we can really reverse that spiral. We can come out of grief if we have the right community that holds us in that space. I really feel it's so, so important to choose who you hang out with very wisely
Mm.
in general in life, but in particular when it comes to grief.
Yeah.
And when you hang out with people who are constantly just drag me down and holding you down in this um, mud of grief, I want to
Yeah.
call it, it's very hard to get out of that. But if you have people who help you rinse that mud off and hold you in that light, in that space, and help you through that, or just simply sit with you, I think people really need to learn to sit with someone. We always feel like we have to fix it, we have to have advice ready. We don't, especially when you haven't lived through it. How can you know?
Yeah.
So we come up with advice that we heard about or think might be helpful, which is often not. So just learn to sit with people. And yeah, from that space, just I wanted to create this upward spiral. So I invited more and more people to speak on the podcast who have come through it, who have come out on the other side, realizing that life is actually really freaking beautiful, despite adversity and with all of it that he brought into your life. And then when I had my 1 year break, this is when I closed the Facebook group, when I stepped away from Loving Life After Loss and was in that transition period of where to next, complete surrender. And it went into more speaking and educating, like really becoming an advocate for grief. That's
Mhm.
when I renamed it to Unsilenced Grief. It just felt more suitable at that stage, but it's basically the
Mhm.
same thing, just providing a platform for people to be able to share their story and how they've gotten through it.
Mm. I
Mm.
I would love to carry this conversation on. I know you have a time restraint. So what let's start to wind down, and I want to ask the question, what are some practical steps? Because as people listen to the podcast and they listen to this, there's people out there that are looking, maybe looking for advice,
Mm.
whether they're in the first stages of grief or it's happened a long time ago. But what practical steps can people take to start their healing journey? What are some things that are like almost universal truths about how to handle grief in the first stages?
Yeah, thank you. I feel that there are definitely some universal stages, and I would really love for people, if so I told you before, I've written a couple of books about it. The Loving Life After Loss was just our story,
Mm,
but I wrote a book afterwards. It's called Happy Healing,
mm,
and it's available on Amazon. So it's a very low cost investment into your healing journey. In Happy Healing, I actually share my 7 steps from grief to relief,
mm,
and they, for me, are the sort of universal things, how you look at grief, how you separate, for example, who you have lost from what you have lost. That's the very first step out of the 7 steps, that you really look at what is it actually that keeps you stuck in the mud. And for me, because we often feel when our person dies that we lose everything with them, which
mm,
isn't true. It's just that when you live your life together for that long and you're so intertwined, that a lot of those things are intertwined with that person.
yeah,
It's about untangling okay, what is it that is actually causing me the deepest grief? And how can I feel these needs for me? They will be different. It will never be replacing him, will never be the same. And the never be the same doesn't have to be negative. That's the biggest thing,
yeah,
because that's another common myth or a common sentence that a lot of people use. My life will never be the same. That is from the grief perspective, or my life will never be the same. Okay, so what am I going to do with it? It's like a blank canvas. This is up to me what I create from it.
yeah,
And people go into this space of, um, I didn't choose this. I didn't choose for my husband to die. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm always like, well, from a spiritual perspective, I think maybe you have, but I very, very, very rarely go there unless I know the person is deeply spiritual and ready to hear it. Big,
mm,
big thing. Um, but I leave that in my head and then out comes loud. But you can choose what you do with it. And that is what most people forget. They stay stuck in that, I didn't choose for my husband to die, rather than going into, okay, what am I choosing now to do with this? Because going forward, everything is your choice. Even in the back, it was your choice. What you do with your life is your choice, full stop.
yeah,
And I'm going to give you one little example that will be super helpful for the parents out there,
please.
mostly moms, I want to say. And it's my most beautiful and simplest reframe there is. When I meet with moms, I often get this, well, I got to. I got to get out of bed for my kids. I got to, you know, carry on for my kids, and there's this suffering and the heaviness that I feel in that. And I look at them and I said, what if you were to try on, I get to?
Mm.
Feel how that shifts. I get to get out of bed for my kids. I get to make lunch for my kids. I get to, show up for them, because then it feels like a gift rather than a burden.
Mhm.
It's that tiny little shift from I got to I get to. And then people always say, well, I got to move on for my kids, and I'm like, so here I want to say this to you. Um, you chose to get out of bed. You chose to get up, make lunch, drive them to school, show up for them. And you telling me, well, I got to, like you have no other choice. There are so many other choices that I don't want to recommend to anyone, but they are there and people do choose them. There are people who choose to go into drugs, antidepressants, alcohol, sometimes even suicide. So unfortunately, there's a whole lot of other choices that I really don't recommend to anyone. And I really hope that you find somebody to help you out of that. But fact is, there are choices every day, and it's up to you to choose where you want to take that and where you want to take your children. That's the biggest thing. Not everybody has got children when their husband dies, but
Yeah.
people often say that this is their number one reason to keep going. And here you've already made your choice. See what I mean? So there's no I got to, you get to. And I love that. Yeah.
I've heard that before, not in the context of grief, but just in the context of life. I get to.
Yeah.
And when I have said it and used that myself, it's so simple, yet it changes the context of your day. It's
Mm.
like I get to go to work and earn money. I get to, I get to go to the gym. Like some people complain about having to go work out. And it's like, no, you get to walk there. Like some people, like it's about perspective.
Yeah.
And that's so important. I paused there for a second because I don't know if I want to keep this next question in the podcast, but I want to ask you something and then I'll decide later if I want to edit it out.
Sure.
Have you counseled or worked with people who, and I'm sure you have, and this is going to be really tough for me, people who have lost children? Because
Yes.
people say that is the most unnatural thing in life is to have your children die before you.
Yeah. I
How does
have.
that change? How do you handle that? Because to me, that feels like a completely different animal to deal with.
Yeah. Yes and no.
Yeah.
Um, so I too held the belief for many, many years, until I got into this work, that there's nothing worse than losing your own children. And I also have to say that part of me still holds that belief.
Yeah.
And another part of me has opened up to the idea that your grief is always the worst one for you. And it is not helpful at all to compare grief.
Mm,
Uh, what difference does it make if it's worse or better than any other grief? Because it's your grief. And what happens in your life is your grief. And how you deal with it, again, is also your choice. And I remember a very good friend of mine. We met through the movement, actually. He was one of my first interview guests on Up Spiral Grief back then,
mhm.
and he actually started something that was he wanted to call Loving Love After Loss, and then he was like, "Who is this lady who's got what I wanted?" And then he called his Loving Life After. So that's how we connected. We became really good friends, and
Nice.
Chris actually lost his son, um, and I don't even want to go into the circumstances because that's his story to tell.
Mhm,
But he said to me, I don't hold that belief anymore that losing your child is the worst that can happen to you. He's
mm,
found so much peace with his son's story, his son's choices, and his life and his choices that he has made through that. He's at absolute peace with it. And he said, I look at other people who have lost their partner, somebody else, who feel in a lot more despair than I do. So he dropped that belief that losing a child is the worst thing that can ever happen to you, because he said everything, every single death in life and the grief that comes with it is dependent on so many factors and circumstances that it is an absolute waste of energy to call it worst or best, because it doesn't help us. I always say, like, comparison doesn't help us heal. So that's my long-winded
Uh,
answer to
no,
that
no,
question.
I understand that now. Everyone's grief is different. Everyone's grief is their own.
Yeah.
And, for someone who maybe has never had children, there maybe the loss of their partner or of a parent
Mm.
is as deep.
Mm.
So thank you for that. That was an interesting response, because I thought for sure you would have given a story about people you've worked with that have lost children, and how much more, just horrible that can feel to a parent, right? But
Yeah.
grief is your own, regardless
Yeah.
of the situation. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
I'll end there. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your books, the website, where people can find you, and for people who are listening today, if everybody has a story of grief, everyone probably has lost somebody and has gone through this, but tell the audience, you know, maybe give a final thought, and then
Mm.
let's talk about where they can find you and find your books, and maybe reach out to you and listen to the podcast. I just want to promote what you're doing, because I think it is. You mentioned a passion project on the one. I think what you're doing completely is a passion project from day one that you started this, Marie, and it's beautiful. So let's talk about that and where people can find you, and let's give some final
Sure.
words.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll give you a very quick nutshell of all the books, what they are, so people can feel what feels right for them. The first book, as I said, Loving Love After Loss, I've already talked a lot about it. It literally shares our love story, how I met Rob, how I fell in love with him, how he passed, and how I dealt with it. Um, The second book is Happy Healing. So that is basically where I wrote the continuum, what happened after Loving Love After Loss was published, how it turned into a global movement, how I also share the 7 steps from grief to relief in the book. And yeah, just a bit more of a hands-on tools. Yeah, there are hands-on tools in that book that people can really use on the spot, how to deal with it in those early stages. Then I shared a prompted journal called Sparks of Joy. So the Sparks of Joy is something that people often buy when they don't know what to do. Somebody has lost someone and they don't know how to help them through that. It's a really, really beautiful gift, because the Sparks of Joy has got one line every single day, just 2 or 3 lines, something that will spark joy. And then it's got the page where people can journal their own thoughts on it.
Nice.
And everybody who's purchased one has come back and purchased another one for another friend. Like, I really thought it was so beautiful.
Ah,
It yeah, used to be a newsletter, and then when I closed the movement, and yeah, I just wanted that to not sort of, yeah, be closed off with the movement. I just turned it
yeah.
into a prompted journal. And then I co-authored another couple of books. And one of them I want to mention in particular, because it was such a passion project, because a lot of people who have been through grief came together and collaborated in this book. And my beautiful friend, Robert Pardy, has actually put that together. And that book is called After. So you will find it under Rob Pardy, Pardi, and you'll see it on my website as well if you go there. So my website is mariealessi.com, and you find everything there, including some DIY courses, if that helps you. I put them on there for very, very low fees, so people can really have access to all of that.
Excellent.
Um,
Keep
yeah.
going. No, tell us more if there's
No, I
more.
just wanted to say the 7 steps from grief to relief are
Yeah.
on there as a guided video course, a DIY course as well. So some people prefer that to the book,
Hmm.
whatever else.
Well,
And you can reach out to me. So,
yeah,
there's a button on the book a chat with Marie. Just reach out to me. It's really me who's on the other side. You can talk to me.
nice.
Yeah.
All those will be in the show notes. I'll make sure that all those, and we're gonna, and yeah, I've had 20 interviews this month alone, and there's only a couple that have really hit different, and today was one of those, Marie. So thank you very much for sharing your story. I know you share it probably a lot, and now it's become it's become part of your journey, part of the process of helping others, and it's so incredibly wonderful to see someone being able to do that for others. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for being on the show today, and I wish you all the best of luck in the future with everything you're doing here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I also want to say, yes, I do share the story quite often, but very rarely does a host take me so deeply into the emotion. I felt so much
Aw,
emotion to myself, although I've shared the story literally hundreds, if not 1,000 of times by now. So I I really want to thank you for that as well. It was beautiful. Thank you, Quinn.
that is the greatest compliment I could receive. Thank you very much, Marie.
Thank you.